We are delighted to be at the Ontario Legislature sitting in the office of the Premier because our first guest tonight is the First Minister of our province. And speaking of firsts, she is the first woman to hold the title of Premier of Ontario since 1867, but she is the 25th Premier, so life is not all firsts for Kathleen Wynne. Premier Wynne has been leader of the Liberal Party of Ontario since 2013 and Premier since that time, succeeding Dalton McGuinty.
Premier Wynne was born in Toronto Western Hospital, grew up in Richmond Hill, lived for a time in the Netherlands, and has been a proud and active resident of Midtown Toronto for most of her adult life. She has been a teacher, a community activist, a mediator, a school trustee, and the member of Provincial Parliament for Don Valley West since 2013. And Premier, it's such a pleasure to be in your home office. Well, it's not your home office, but it's where you spend a lot of time, and we're delighted.
It must seem like home.
I haven't been in this office since 2003, but I've been at Queen's Park since 2003.
Right. It's a lot of time, and we're delighted that you invited us here. And I'm going to let you start the conversation, if you'd like, Jim.
With pleasure. Thank you very much. And Premier Wynne, nice to be with you. And you know, you've been in the limelight for over a decade, but I don't think a lot of Ontarians know that much about you personally. So let's start with your early life, and we'll get into your career in a few minutes. But sure. Your early days, your father was a doctor, your mother was a singer. You were the oldest of four girls, or you are the oldest of four girls. You had a very comfortable and happy childhood from all accounts. So where did the political bug hit you? Was there a gene in the family that made you kind of an activist, or was this something that was more of a surprise as you grew up?
Well, I think there is a gene. I think there is a gene. You noted that my middle name is O'Day,
yes,
and there's an Irish agitator in there. My mother was always somebody who was trying to make things better. You know, she was never quite satisfied with the way things were. She had been orphaned by the age of 10, and she was sent up to school from Nassau. She grew up in Nassau, Bahamas.
Wow.
And she was sent up to school here in Toronto, where she met my dad when she was a teenager. But so she was a singer. But when she had all these kids, because she had 3 kids in 3 years and then a fourth 5 years later, she got very involved in the community, and she was very active in the social planning council in Richmond Hill, and those were the 60s, you know, and there were lots of kids kind of trying to find their way. So she and my dad were involved in creating a drop-in center for young people and providing services. And then she actually got into social services and became a play therapist. So she was somebody who didn't accept the status quo. You know, she was always looking for how we can make things better, and she believed in government. You know, she interacted with government, whether it was the municipal government or provincial government later on when she was working as a therapist, and there was a little center that needed funding, and she was looking for funding. She came down here to Queen's Park to look for funding. So I think I understood.
It was an activist gene, no question.
I understood that.
And
if
it was your mother more than anyone.
It was my mom. Although Dad was involved, ironically, with the OMA, he was very much
that became
here.
More political.
Well, and in 1986, if you'll remember, there were a few doctors on the front lawn of Queen's Park, and my dad was one of those. So, you know, there was an expectation in my family that if you believed in something, and if you thought that there was an injustice, that you stood up for it and stood up against that injustice and tried to find a better way.
Good ideals.
Yeah. Well, you became something of a firebrand and an activist in your own right, and an education activist, a parent activist, of course, and also taking on the divisive government of Mike Harris probably was when you were able to work on those things that weren't right in terms of education.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, when I was a young mom in North Toronto and my kids were at school, one of the first things I got involved in, there was actually a teacher strike in 1987. It was about prep time, but it was really about having more music teachers, art teachers, librarians in our elementary schools. And so I was part of working with the teachers at that point. So my interaction then was with the teachers unions and with the Board of Education. And then when Mike Harris was elected, it changed. You know, the whole discussion around public services changed. The discussion around education changed, and I was very worried about my kids' education. I was worried about kids who were going to be left behind because of the resources that were being taken out of schools. At the same time, that government was making decisions, unilateral decisions, as you know, about municipal governance and
you were part of the
imposing-
anti-amalgamation group.
And so I was getting involved in North Toronto with bringing people together to try to form some sort of resistance to that. Meanwhile, downtown, John Sewell was involved in bringing folks together. Actually, John Sewell and Gerard Kennedy brought together a group called the Together Group, and they were trying to determine a path of action. In North Toronto, we were concerned citizens of North Toronto, and we were trying to come together to figure out how we were going to pay back the $200 that Mike Harris was going to give us. And those groups came together. I connected with John Sewell, and then that was really how I got involved in the resistance against
Right,
Mike
and that's
Harris.
how you earned your early political stripes.
Yeah.
That is indeed how I earned my early political stripes.
So what prompted you to run for provincial parliament as opposed to perhaps running downtown for city council? I guess because the education portfolio rests here. Go ahead.
My heart was with education, and so I had run for the school board in 1994, so I lost my first election by 72 votes, and that was before Harris was elected. So I was already interested in being part of the governance structure. Then we had the election of Harris and all of that turmoil, and I ran again in 2000 for the school board because I had been involved in education activism. That was always where my heart was. And then I decided, so I was in office as a trustee from 2000 till 2003, so in that time we were getting ready for a provincial election. And I just decided, quite frankly, that if I were going to be able to really make a statement about education and be where the change could be made, I needed to at least try to throw my hat in provincially.
And with the Liberals, as opposed to the NDP, which some people might have thought you would run for.
Yeah, I heard that often, you know. I thought you were going to run for the NDP. I'd always voted Liberal. You know, I had not been part of the party infrastructure. I hadn't been a card-carrying Liberal, and I will admit that I had voted differently at some times, but Liberal was my philosophical home. It was also our family's philosophical home, you know. We grew up with stories of Mitch Hepburn. My grandmother talking about Mitch Hepburn on the manure spreader, you know. So I always found myself in the middle of the spectrum, not ideologically on the left or the right, and not interested in being there. I like the flexibility of the center. I think that's where so many Ontarians are, and you know, if I had to locate myself on that, what I think is sort of an out-of-date political spectrum, but I would locate myself sort of left of center, but definitely in that center area.
So you were elected provincially, and you entered the cabinet of Premier Dalton McGuinty in 2006, and you became the education minister. And that's a portfolio you held for 4 years?
Yeah, so I was 3 years. Those first 3 years were very important to me before I was in cabinet.
Good learning
because
years.
I had an opportunity to understand how this place works and to serve on committees and be part of carrying bills through the legislature. Worked as a parliamentary assistant in training colleges and universities and in education. And then in 2006, Dalton appointed me to education, and I was there until 2010.
That must have been your dream portfolio, and you probably got got a lot of things done, and it was a time when a lot needed doing. So what do you consider some of your major achievements during that time, and perhaps the challenges?
Yeah, we were right into the thick of it. You know, we were implementing class size caps, so kindergarten to grade 3 class sizes of 20 students, and then we were just starting to do the implementation of full day kindergarten. You know, that I was there when that began, and so it was a very exciting time. And I consider that implementation of full day kindergarten that we got off the ground one of our big achievements. But we were reestablishing labor relations with the unions and the federations. So that was a big part of what I consider my success, because we had successful negotiations. I reintroduced equity and inclusive education into the Ministry of Education, because that had been removed, and all the while we were putting more teachers, more support staff into the schools, because they really had been stripped out. So schools were getting more supports, more special education supports, more, as I say, more education staff than they had had under the previous regime. Yeah.
But then in 2010, there was a cabinet shuffle, and you were moved out of education and into transportation. And I'm sure, I mean, of course, at the time, you have to say, well, I'm very excited about the new opportunity. But was it tough for you to move out of education at that point?
I can remember that day so well. I remember going into the Premier's office, and I really did not, I did not know. You really don't know until that call. Yeah. And I was so excited about what I was doing in education and having a great time. And when he asked me to serve as Minister of Transportation, you're right, of course, I said, I am honored to do whatever you ask me to do, Premier. I left the room and promptly burst into tears. His staff were waiting. His staff were waiting for me, because they knew I was going to be, they knew I was going to be upset. But honestly, it was the best thing. It was the best thing that ever happened to me.
But you had 2 more portfolios
I was
after
going to ask that.
Aboriginal Affairs, municipal.
But transportation was that break with education. That was the moment that I really branched into an area that I didn't know anything about transportation. I'm quite happy to say that. But I learned about infrastructure. I learned about the importance of infrastructure to the province, but to each of the communities around the province. And honestly, I can follow that thread through to the platform that I ran my leadership on, which was really founded in the need for strong building.
Right. Let me talk about the leadership, because there was the election of 2011, which gave you a minority government, and then finally the Premier decided to resign in 2013, and you decided to throw...
He stepped down in 2012.
Sorry, 2012 he stepped down, but the leadership happened in 2013. At that point, the fortunes of the party were clearly falling. Did you have a lot of second thoughts before thinking, if I run and win, I might be taking over a sinking ship?
That isn't how I thought about it. Okay. I believed in what we had done. I believed in Dalton. I believed in the work that he had done. He's such a decent man and had a strong vision for the province that was a decent vision. Yep. And so I was so proud to have served with him, and felt that we had a solid foundation on which to build. And I thought about the leadership for a short time, but what really decided me was my family saying, and how are you going to feel if you don't run? What's that going to be like? Will that be a regret in your life? Now, I will tell you, at the time that we had just sold our house, we were renovating a new house. My partner Jane had just gotten a cancer diagnosis, and so we were really in turmoil. But it looked like she was going to be okay, and we agreed that I wanted to be part of the debate. Every election you go into, whether it's for a leadership or whether it's a riding election, you have to be prepared to lose. And because I had lost my first election and I had lost my first nomination, I knew what that felt like. Yeah. And so I was prepared to lose, but I wasn't prepared not to be part of the discussion.
Right. But you don't have a habit of losing. In fact, you really seem to win against the odds often. And in that leadership race, you were up against cabinet colleagues and friends. Was that a difficult thing to be able to speak your own mind, but at the same time imply that theirs was not as strong a position as yours?
It's the hardest kind of election when you're running against people who you
respect.
believe in, who you
And how do you
who
build
you'd
the
worked
bridges
for,
after
you
that?
know?
Yeah.
I mean, I had been both Sandra and Gerard's parliamentary assistant. You know, I had worked closely with them. Yeah, it was very, very hard, but because we were friends, because we believed in each other and supported each other, the debates were very civil, and I think pretty substantive. The other thing about that leadership is it was very short. And so there wasn't a lot of time for deep rifts in the party to kind of open up.
So presumably they healed quicker.
They healed
but
more
you had
quickly.
something to do with healing them.
Well, I like to think that, but I also know that had that gone on, had the leadership race gone on for a year or even 8 months, it would have been much harder to pull people back into the tent.
We've only got about a minute left in this first part, but I wanted to ask about, I wanted to get us up to the 2014 election, because against all odds, again, talking about odds that you defy, you won a majority government when people were pretty much counting you out at the beginning of that campaign. How did you do it?
We won by putting forward a platform that was constructive. Literally, we said we're going to build, we're going to make investments, we're not going to opt for austerity. And I truly believe that that's how we won.
Well, it was pretty death-defying what you did, yeah.
You surprised a lot of people, but you didn't surprise yourself. And
Well, we felt strongly, that we
One
were on
last
the right
question,
track.
and it's
I don't know if we have
2016.
another question.
It's 2016, but has being a woman and being a gay woman been any kind of an impediment to you or a detriment to you in your career?
I think it has meant that there have been some barriers that have been thrown up that I've had to simply say, I'm not going to let that stop me, you know. And the people who want to come with me, and those who don't, we'll see on the other side.
well,
You bet. Speaking of the other side,
we have
we'll
to
be back
break at
after
this
this
point.
short break with more with Premier Kathleen Wynne.